Well, hello, I am Pastor Michelle, and I'm built different. I'm Pastor Michelle at Harmony Creek Church, and this is my sermon for today, for those of you who may have not been able to be with us this morning. And so my sermon is called Stay Lit and Salty. so, so this week, we're picking up where we left off last Sunday. We're still with Jesus on the mountaintop, and he's still preaching the Sermon on the Mount. And what's important to point out is before Jesus tells people what to do, he tells them who they are. When Jesus looks out at the crowd before he starts speaking, he's not speaking to people who are particularly the A-list members of community. He's not speaking to the people who are seen as the most powerful or the most valuable. One could say that the people who were most drawn to Jesus were the nobodies, because Jesus had this amazing ability of making the nobodies feel like somebody. And I think that's what we're all called to do as best as we can. And the nobodies in Jesus's day didn't have it easy. They were living in poverty. They were living under Roman occupation. They were people who were taxed, controlled, watched, and dismissed. They were people who had been told in 1,000 ways, you don't matter. And what does Jesus do? Jesus looks at them and says, you matter. You are blessed. You are important. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Jesus is telling people who have been dehumanized, even, I would say, that they are essential. Now, before we dive a little bit deeper into the salt and light metaphor, I want to start with a story about a man who had seen the light. So Clark, a 90-year-old man, goes for a physical and all his tests come back normal. The doctor says, Clark, everything looks great, but I want to know how you're doing mentally and emotionally. Are you at peace with God? And Clark replies, yeah, God and I are tight. God knows I have poor eyesight, so God has fixed it. So when I get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, poof, the light goes on. And when I'm done, poof, the light goes off. That's incredible, the doctor says. A little later in the day, the doctor calls Lois, Clark's wife, and says, Lois, Larry's doing just fine, but I had to call you because I'm so in awe of Lois. Clark is doing fine. Sorry, Larry was the original person in the joke. But Lois is like, the doctor says, I had to call you because I'm in awe of his relationship with God. Is it true that he gets up during the night and poof, the light, when he goes to the bathroom, and poof, the light goes on in the bathroom, and when he's done, poof, the light goes off? And Lois says, oh, man, he's peeing in the refrigerator again. I don't know when I told this joke this morning. I may have said Larry instead of Clark, but we'll see. But yeah, that's a fun one. Now, when Jesus talks about light in our passage, I doubt this is what he had in mind. So I want us, though, to think about this whole salt and light business. You know, Jesus knew exactly what he was doing when he called the people the salt of the earth and the light of the world. It was a very radical statement to make, because when you call someone the salt of the earth, you're essentially saying they're a very truly reliable person, and they're incredibly important to the world. And so imagine, he's saying this to people who have never been told that they're important at all. Maybe they have felt invisible their whole lives, and all of a sudden Jesus is saying, you know what? You are the salt of the earth. So when we think about salt, let's think about salt first. Salt, we think of seasoning. We think a little sprinkle there, a little sprinkle there. And personally, I really love salt. And I love it too much, because salt is something we can't live without, but it's also something we don't want to have too much of. But I love salt, and it's something my doctor has pointed out to me, that I may love it a little too much. For example, I love going to the beach because I love the salty ocean. I love the taste of the salt on my lips. But I digress. I just love salt. But, in Jesus's world, salt was more than just a condiment, something to put on your food. Salt was seen as this very essential thing because, salt preserved food. Salt prevented decay. Salt made survival possible in a world where you didn't have refrigeration. And without salt, people starved. It wasn't just, people would eat bland meals if they didn't have salt. They may not eat at all. So when Jesus says you are the salt of the earth, he's saying that, your life matters. Your presence makes survival possible. The world needs you. And salt, and I think this is important to point out, it wasn't just practical, it was valuable. In the Roman world, salt was a form of payment. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt. That's where we get the word salary from. It's salarium, a Latin word. And, you know, and I read too that salt is just absolutely essential for human survival. Our bodies don't produce sodium on its own. So here we have Jesus literally telling people who have been told perhaps their whole lives that they're worthless, that you know what? They are worthy. They are worth something. They're valuable and they're not disposable. You know, in a system that treated people as replaceable, Jesus was saying, you know what? You're essential. You matter. And you're blessed for exactly who you are. And it's important to point out, too, that salt is something that actually can't lose its saltiness. And Jesus, I'm sure, didn't know this at the time because, you know, there was no Siri or Alexa. But I think he was just saying an analogy here when he says that. He's saying, you know, do what you were created to do. Live into who you already are. Because one of the amazing things about salt is that salt is salt. Like, by its very, you know, identity, salt is something that never loses its saltiness. And I read the salt only loses its saltiness when other elements are combined into salt. But if salt is just left as salt, salt will remain fine and not decay or not do anything forever. So the question becomes, though, when we think about that, you know, do what you were created to do. What were we created to do? Let's leave that hanging for a second, because then we go on and we see that Jesus says you are the light of the world. And Jesus doesn't say you should become light or earn your brightness. Jesus is telling people that they already are light, just as they are. To a people that might not have even felt seen, Jesus is seeing them. And light during Jesus' day was important because also light was one of the very first things that God created. You know, during Jesus' time, light was precious and never taken for granted. You know, and lights usually came from oil lamps or perhaps a fire or the sun and the moon. And thinking specifically about oil lamps, the oil cost money and wicks would burn out easily probably, and lamps could easily go out. And so think about the money it took to just have light. So light wasn't just convenient, though. It was essential for survival. So think about how necessary light was. So when Jesus tells people that they are the light of the world, he's telling them that they matter. When Jesus tells people that they are the light of the world and the salt for the earth, he is saying that they are two of the most essential things in order to survive in this world. And he's saying that to people who have never felt essential before. And I want to flip the script a little because I want us to remember, you know, I think we are called to be the light for the world and the salt for the earth. I think it's an important distinction. I even changed the wording in the scripture readings in the bulletin to use the word for instead of, because there's a difference there. Because salt of the earth, light of the world implies your identity, which is great. But then what's your identity for? What are we created to do? It's answered by having it be light for the world, salt for the earth. That's part of our identity, perhaps. That's part of what we're created to do. And, you know, what does it mean, though? Like, what does that look like, being light for the world and salt for the earth? I do want to think about lights, though, for a minute, just because I was thinking about when you go to IKEA and you go into the lighting section and you see all those different lights. You know, you have floor lamps, you have desk lamps, you have string lights, spotlights, soft lights, blinding lights, and bright lights. And the thing is, you have all these distinct lights, and none of them are saying, I wish I were that light instead. No, they all shine in the exact way that they were designed to shine. And in this passage, when Jesus is saying, you're the light of the world, you know, he's not saying he wants that everyone should shine the exact same way. He's saying the world needs every kind of light. People need to be able to shine their light however they're going to shine it. And there's many different ways to shine light. And even thinking about salt. What does it mean to be the salt of the earth? When you call someone the salt of the earth, you're telling that person that they're dependable and honest. And so it's pretty incredible that Jesus is calling the marginalized people of his world the salt of the earth. But salt is something that can be used in many ways. So like salt, there are a variety of ways to be salty. So there's a variety of ways to be lit, And there are a variety of ways to be salty. And we each have our own ways of doing that. And each way matters. There's not one way better than the others. I think that's important to remember. Every single voice matters. Every gift that you have matters. You, my friends, you matter. You matter. So I think being the salt and the light for the world, going back to that, means using your unique, authentic, God-given talents to better the world around you. Being salt and light isn't about doing everything. It's about doing our part right where we are. We are the salt for the world when we preserve what is good, when we speak up when humanity is threatened. I think of all the people that went to that Springfield event this past Monday, people that weren't afraid to speak up. We are salt for the world when we protect the vulnerable, when we refuse to let injustice become normal. And speaking of and thinking of light, we are light for the world when we make goodness visible and we let our values show in our choices and not just our words. We are light for the world when we help people find their way, when we are a steady presence for others when they feel lost, when we walk alongside people rather than ahead or above. We are the light for the world when we name injustice. Because, injustice thrives in silence. When we bring things to light that need to be brought to light, those are ways that we can be a light for the world. And my goodness, Harmony Creek Church, we are a very bright light for the world because we are a church that shows up over and over again. And we bring things to light that need to be called out. We show up. So many of our members show up to protest. So I've never been part of a congregation that is more lit and more salty than Harmony Creek Church. So I want to turn attention to a few things. So with it being Super Bowl Sunday today and the Winter Olympics have started, I wanted to talk about sports for a moment, just to bring in this, that every piece matters, every voice matters. In football, every position matters. The quarterback matters just as much as the running back or even the punter or the field goal kicker. If you have a really good offensive line, you're going to score touchdowns. If you don't, then maybe you won't score as much. If you have a really good defensive line, then the other team is not going to score on you as much. But if you have a bad defensive line, then you may not win as many games. And I think about that, and everyone on when a football team is working really well together, that's when teams are good enough to make it to the Super Bowl. And even thinking about the Olympics, especially thinking about some of those team sports, in curling, every position matters. In ice hockey, every position matters. In gymnastics, every position matters, and so on and so on. And I like to think of humanity as being like one big team where every single player matters. And it is sad that we live in a world that doesn't really recognize that. Because we still live in a world where some people are saying that other people don't matter, that other players shouldn't be on the team because of whatever. But we, as followers of Jesus Christ, we're called to be about a different narrative. We're called to show the world that those people that others may be saying don't belong on the team of humanity, they do belong. They do matter. We need to be speaking up, especially for our friends that are being marginalized at this moment. That's how we can be salty. That's how we can be lit. To continue speaking out. And it doesn't mean that we have to go to protests all the time or put our lives on the line. Speaking out could mean just showing up into this world as your most authentic self. Being a safe person for someone. Being someone that someone could turn to. It also means possibly calling Congress members, right? And using our power in that way. But every single one of us, we have these gifts. I think of people that have sewing skills and crocheting skills, and think of the things that they're able to make. They're able to make these, and one of our members makes prayer squares. And what a gift that she brings to the world by being able to do that. And so I just really, there's so many different ways to show up in this world, but the most important way to show up is to show up as your full, authentic self. And so I want to close by talking about the Lego Movie 2, because last week I talked about Lego Movie 1. Now in Lego Movie 2, The town of Bricksburg has now become Apocalypseburg. And the characters aren't just fighting outside villains anymore. They're wrestling with fear, growing up in temptation to harden themselves to survive. And Emmett, who is this optimistic character, right? His optimism is challenged by a harsher reality. And the movie lands on a very surprisingly incredible message that things don't have to be perfect or awesome to be meaningful. When people choose empathy and cooperation and creativity over control and cynicism, they can rebuild something new together. And that's what happens in the Lego movie too. There's this conflict between the brother and the sister, because the brother has one way he wants to play with Legos, while the sister just brings in chaos, right? But at the end of the day, they come together to play together. And even though they don't agree on everything, they still find a way to see that their voice, their way of playing matters just as much as the other person's way. It's a beautiful movie. So so the Lego movie, I think, really represents this. Every piece matters. So bringing this back to us in our world, which feels like Apocalypseburg. It's true that everything is not awesome right now. Our world is hurting. Our systems are broken. But when we work together, when we honor every piece, even the pieces that we may not feel like should be part of it, even the pieces that we don't agree with, right? When we find a way to cooperate and come together and connect like Lego pieces, then things can become just a little more awesome and maybe just a little less not awesome. So I invite you, my friends, to stay lit and salty. Remember, you are salt of the earth for the earth. You are light of the world for the world. So remember your identity, my friends. We are the light for the world. We are the salt for the earth. May it be so. God bless you all, my friends.